Order. I suspended the sitting until 11 o'clock, but we have the mover of the motion present and we have the Minister present, so I see absolutely no reason why we shouldn't start. So I'm going to call Richard Ford to move the motion, and I shall then call the Minister to respond. As is always the case with 30-minute debates, there is no opportunity for the member in charge to wind up at the end. So without further ado, Richard Ford to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship. And I beg to move that this House has considered national resilience and preparedness. I'm bringing this debate to the House today so that people who I represent might hear from the government about what it is doing to make the UK more prepared and resilient. I was inspired partly by the Hallett inquiry, the inquiry into COVID-19 last July, and Module 1, which reported last summer. And in this debate today, I want to go beyond thinking about pandemics, to think also about our broader resilience and preparedness in the UK. At Cabinet Office questions last month, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster confirmed that the government would report in response to Module 1 this month, in January. So we're looking forward to hearing what the government has to say in response. And I want to focus today on three areas: future pandemics, food security, and hybrid threats.
On that point?
Yes.
Mr Chairman, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for bringing this forward? It is important across the United Kingdom we have efficient contingency plans for all sorts of national crises and national disasters the Honourable Gentleman has referred to. Local communities are encouraged to engage in the past in activities, emergency plans, emergency response training. So does the Honourable Member agree that there is more this Government can do to engage with the devolved institutions, in particular local councils, to ensure we have a joint strategy across the whole of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Indeed. The Honourable Gentleman is an old friend and he's been here for a long time. We really must get out of the habit of reading into the record pre-prepared interventions. An intervention is an intervention, not a contribution to the debate. Richard Ford.
Well, I've got to say I do agree with the Honourable Member for Strangford that the civil contingencies legislation that we have in this country puts a lot of the onus on the devolved institutions, a lot of the responsibility on local government. And what we cannot afford is for national government to therefore shed itself of all of its responsibilities and simply rely only on local and devolved institutions. Resilience is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly. And I'm suggesting today that the UK government currently doesn't offer us that. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed critical weaknesses in planning and preparedness for large-scale emergencies, revealing that while the UK has made great strides in terms of our recovery, and we did after the pandemic, we may still lack the capacity to withstand other crises. Our vulnerabilities to emerging climate change, to food security risks, and to hybrid threats from the UK's adversaries leave us unprepared to endure shocks and unable to recover swiftly. So firstly, to COVID-19. The Hallett inquiry in Module 1 was a crucial call to action. The report concluded that the nation was ill-prepared and that citizens were failed by the systems that we had in place at the start of 2020. I think only at the time of how the Prime Minister was wandering around, the Prime Minister at that time, Boris Johnson, was wandering around hospitals shaking hands while the national guidance was proposing that we should be doing something completely different to that. The Hallett report revealed that the UK's emergency planning was too much focused on influenza and failed to account for any other sort of pandemic. One of the most critical failings identified was the unduly complex and labyrinthine nature of the UK's civil emergency planning structures. Responsibility for pandemic preparedness was dispersed across multiple bodies, leading to inefficiencies and a lack of clear leadership. The inquiry also scrutinised the government's risk assessment processes, finding 5 major flaws that significantly affected the UK's preparedness. And these included a lack of focus on prevention, insufficient consideration of interconnected risks, and these included economic and social vulnerabilities. If we think back to the 2016 preparedness exercise Cygnus, which simulated the impact of a flu pandemic, it identified critical gaps in the UK's preparedness, including insufficient capacity in the health system and a lack of essential supplies like PPE. The recommendations from the exercise in 2016 were not acted upon. And when COVID-19 emerged, the same shortcomings persisted, with delays in PPE, inadequate testing, and healthcare services that became overwhelmed in some places. Over 200,000 excess deaths have been attributed to COVID-19 in the UK, many of which may have been preventable with better planning and better resilience. The pandemic also inflicted severe economic damage, with the UK experiencing one of the deepest recessions among the advanced economies. Businesses closed, jobs were lost. The strain on the public sector and on public services like our NHS is still being felt to this day. The inquiry's report set out key recommendations to overhaul the UK's approach to civil emergency preparedness. These recommendations included regular pandemic response exercises and enhanced data sharing. Yet just last Thursday, Claire Wenham from the Department of Health Policy at the London School of Economics stated that we've had the biggest pandemic of our lifetimes, yet in 2025 we are worse prepared than we were before the pandemic. It would be interesting to know, when the Minister comes to respond, where the government is in relation to the World Health Organization Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. One of the 10 key recommendations from the COVID-19 Inquiry's Module 1 report emphasised the importance of enhanced data collection and data sharing. But the emphasis on domestic resilience, I mean, that's really the subject of today, does have to be balanced with our obligation to cooperate internationally, because pandemics don't respect borders and they do require global solutions. The government should act swiftly to implement the inquiry's recommendations, engage with international frameworks like the World Health Organization Treaty, and rebuild public trust in the nation's ability to protect its citizens. COVID-19 highlighted also some of the difficulties that we have in other aspects of our resilience. Think about the supermarket shortages that we saw and how people reacted. It was a reminder of just how vulnerable Britain is to food supply shocks. Yes, I will.
Thank the honourable member for giving way and also for bringing forward this really important debate. The latest DEFRA food security report found that fewer households were food secure in 2023 than they were in 2020. There can be no more important element to national resilience than food security. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government should introduce a comprehensive national food strategy that tackles rising food prices, it ends food poverty and ensures food security, and it can improve health and nutrition? And does he further agree that we must give the grocery code adjudicator more powers to protect consumers, but also unfair price rises?
The honourable member for Glastonbury and Somerton is absolutely right, and I do want to now get into this subject of food security. I mean, she draws attention to the government's food security report, and in terms of self-sufficiency, we've seen self-sufficiency in the UK in terms of food production decline since the 1980s from 78% in 1984 to just 60% today. And I think that draws, those stats really do emphasise what the honourable member says. And as for the global code adjudicator, she's dead right. We need for supermarkets to honour their deals and pay on time. Yes.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and also for securing this debate. On the point of the reduction in food security down to, I think, below 60%, 58% even, as my neighbour in the West Country, he will know the importance that farmers and food producers play in our community, but we've also just seen the 18 months of the wettest months on record, following swiftly on one of the driest summers in 2022 ever on record, and the devastating effect that that's going to have on food production going forward as we see increased extreme weather conditions. Does he agree that climate resilience and action on climate change is also going to be an important part of the National Resiliency Strategy?
Well, the honourable member from West Dorset is absolutely spot on. And there was a report last October produced by the University of Exeter and Chatham House that highlighted that climate change and environmental degradation is a real weakness in terms of the UK's national security strategy. The authors Tim Lenton and James Dyke from the University of Exeter contributed to this report, and they talked about the national security strategy as having a glaring blind spot for climate threats. And that report specifically identified risks to the food supply chain as a critical concern, exacerbated, no doubt, by some of the challenges that we've seen from government policy lately around agricultural property relief and some of the changes that are proposed to inheritance tax. By contrast, if we think about food security, Finland is a really shining example, not just in food security, but in many respects in terms of resilience. Finland has strategic food reserves, whereas the UK has very much a dependence on real-time logistics with severe risks posed to, when we see severe weather events, when we see fuel shortages, or when we see conflict. Another factor is the UK's departure from the European Union. A significant portion of our imports came from the EU until 2021, and trade disruptions following the UK's departure from that bloc have heightened the risks. Between 2018 and 2023, import volumes from the EU decreased by 6%, and it's not yet evident how the UK is compensating for those lost relationships with our European partners in terms of food supply resilience. The UK's self-sufficiency in fresh vegetables, key in supporting the health of our nation, is at its lowest since records began at just 53% in terms of vegetable self-sufficiency. And I personally have been involved in a campaign to try to have sections of British supermarkets illustrating where products are grown in Britain or sourced in the UK, because it's easy in supermarkets at the moment to not know where your food is coming from, and people are able to buy foods from all around the globe all year round, and while that may be good in times of peace, we have seen during some of our threats to global security recently that this may not persist. We've seen, finally, some of the threats around food security reminding us of what we could see in the future in terms of our national security. And so I want to move, finally, to this issue of defence and of hybrid threats in particular. Defence is no longer just about protecting against armed attacks. I read over the Christmas period Keir Giles's book, Who Will Defend Europe? And I think the chapter in that on hybrid threats is absolutely excellent at illustrating how these range from cyber attacks to disinformation, and the sorts of forms of aggression from states like Russia that will mean that when we think about defence, we've got to think so much more broadly than just bullets and bombs.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and just on the subject of defence and particularly technology, does my honourable friend agree with me that mandating battery backups for all mobile phone masts, both existing and newly installed, would provide a simple, robust solution to ensuring uninterrupted communication access, particularly in rural areas like mine in North Cornwall?
Well, the honourable member for North Cornwall makes an excellent point. I hadn't considered battery backups for mobile phone masts, but it does strike me as a sort of example of a kind of psychology, a way of thinking that we need to get into in this country, about our key national infrastructure, our critical national infrastructure, and how we might support it, rather than just supposing that everything is going to be all right on the night. Just last week, NATO's Deputy Assistant Secretary-General for Innovation, Hybrid and Cyber warned that Russian hybrid attacks are now at a level that would have been absolutely unacceptable 5 years ago. We must not underestimate the damage that Russia can inflict on the UK without firing a bullet. The UK's relaxed approach to security has left some of our critical national infrastructure vulnerable. A stark example is the LOX-driven oil fuel depot in Scotland, which stores fuel for NATO warships and aircraft, but was reported late last year as now surrounded by land bought into Russian ownership. The UK's lack of preparedness is evident in many areas. A damning report by the Royal United Services Institute on the NHS's wartime capabilities reveals that it has no capacity to manage either military or civilian casualties during conflict. I've seen this eroded and undermined in the constituency I represent in Honiton and Sidmouth, where in East Devon we have 5 community hospitals, but we have beds that have been stripped out of those hospitals under the last government. We have seen about 150 beds removed, and if that is scaled up and looked at across the country, then it is little wonder that we are seeing shortages of hospital beds during a spike in flu cases, let alone thinking about our preparedness for any sort of national emergency. Hospital beds is one factor, but we need to think about blood supplies, transport and trained personnel, shortages of which would mean that the system was overwhelmed in no time. Just a couple of months ago, my researcher, Fraser Johnson, went to Finland, and the Finnish government identified for him that they have really taken a very long-term approach to resilience and preparedness. They require their people to have a whole-of-society approach to these things. Defence is not solely the responsibility of state authorities. It involves citizens, charities, NGOs, businesses, schools. The schools teach children how to analyse sources to combat disinformation. Finland has regional security committees that conduct local defence exercises twice a year. The concept of citizens as being security actors makes sure that resilience is embedded throughout society. Helsinki's emergency preparedness is a model of comprehensive planning. They have underground shelters equipped with oxygen supplies, water reserves, beds for 800,000 people to be used in staggered 8-hour shifts. Now, of course, Finland is not the UK. It has some fairly unique challenges, like being desperately cold and having a very long border with Russia. But we need to take some of these lessons from our North European neighbours. Finland's broadcaster operates a secondary news desk 30 metres underground with its own energy supply, ensuring uninterrupted communication during emergencies. The Finnish National Emergency Supply Agency maintains a network of 1,000 public and private partners, ensuring stockpiles of 6 months' worth of fuel. We saw during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 just how much the UK had not only become dependent on gas exports from Russia, but that we didn't even have the stockpiles in the UK. We didn't have the reserves of gas in the UK that meant that when the full-scale invasion happened, the prices here spiked considerably. Despite its proximity to Russia, Finland achieves all of this with a defence budget of 2.4% of GDP. So it's partly about how we use the funding that we've got. Our geographical distance from Russia should not lull us into a sense of complacency. Hybrid threats, by their nature, are difficult to detect and to combat, and their impact will only escalate without decisive action. In January 2024, the Chief of the General Staff called for a shift in mindset to prepare for the possibility of war. The journalist David Parsley broke a story months later about how the MOD was sketching out plans for a so-called citizen army of perhaps 200,000 volunteers trained by reservists. To conclude this section, the UK should adopt a total defence approach, focusing on stockpiling, training and central coordination to enhance resilience against hybrid threats and other challenges. We must move beyond our piecemeal responses and to develop a proactive plan to safeguard our nation and its future. So in conclusion, will the Minister commit to implementing the UK COVID-19 inquiry's recommendations to strengthen our emergency preparedness? Will the Minister offer priority to a national food security plan to ensure resilience against climate change and supply chain disruptions? And will she outline what steps the government will take to develop a comprehensive strategy to counter hybrid threats and to protect our national infrastructure? Thank you.
Habena Opangansari. I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I haven't put the question. I beg your pardon. The question is that this House has considered national resilience and preparedness. Minister.
I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth for providing us with this opportunity to debate this important issue today. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Herne Bay and Sandwich for chairing today's debate. Happy New Year, everybody. I also would like to thank Honourable Member for Strandford, Glastonbury and Somerton and West Dorset and North Cornwall for their important interventions today. I want to make it clear that the government's first responsibility is to keep this country safe, which is why national resilience has been top of the agenda in terms of our priorities since we've come into government. As the Honourable Member has rightly mentioned, COVID and Grenfell inquiries have shown that we've inherited a challenging situation. I also want to go back in terms of explaining the current situation that we're facing at the moment. We are currently dealing with huge uninvestment and the impact of COVID-19 on our public services has been well documented, and we know that this occurred before the pandemic. And also our public services are massively stretched as well. And this is particularly true as within the NHS where key workers are feeling the burden and haven't been asked to go over and beyond. So we're in a situation where society is less resilient than they were before the pandemic. And as the Honourable Member has rightly pointed, there has been an erosion in our resilience at a time when wider threats, including those from nation states, are increasing, and global trends are making the risk landscape more volatile. Therefore, since coming into office, we have taken immediate steps to strengthen resilience, national resilience, by establishing a dedicated subcommittee of the National Security Council on Resilience. As the Honourable Member will know, this is chaired by the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster. We are also looking at how we can improve our approach to the national risk assessment, including greater external challenge and designing a national exercising programme with guidance to improving exercises at all levels and helping those at the front line identify those that are vulnerable, which is something that was a common theme that came out from the COVID-19 Module 1 report. This government has also adopted the 2023 Biological Security Strategy in full, and we're committed to ensuring we have the capabilities we need to protect the public from a spectrum of biological threats. I know the Honourable Member has mentioned the need for particularly looking at the threats that we're facing on a daily basis and making sure we have a robust strategy. So we are looking at how we can strengthen those capabilities. The new Floods Resilience Task Force, which I'm a member of, is doing vital work to finally speed up and improve the delivery of flooding schemes and stop communities going underwater. I know this is an important issue to the Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth, whose constituents have suffered flooding and consequences across Devon. In the year ahead, we are looking to build the work starting on the government's response to the COVID-19 Inquiry Module 1 report this month, so I hope that answers your question. We are also looking at how we can review our resilience, and this was something the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster announced last year in July. The Resilience Review is a focused exercise designed rapidly to identify what is working well and what should be kept. and what needs to be changed and what needs to be stopped, essentially. We are also considering a wide range of evidence. We're looking at lessons learnt in terms of risk and organisation knowledge. A focus for me in particular has been looking at ensuring how we make sure that relevant voices are heard, because one of the common themes that came out from the COVID-19 Module 1 inquiry and also Grenfell inquiry is that certain voices weren't engaged, and we need to move away from having conversations in echo chambers and group thinking. So what I'm doing is undertaking a programme of engagement with stakeholders across the public, private and voluntary sector, including the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So for example, just before Christmas, I held meetings with senior leaders from charities and representative organisations who support people at risk, who are so often disproportionately affected when it comes to emergencies. I also chaired a discussion in autumn with 20 business leaders where I emphasised the importance of government and industry partnership. And this month I'll be inviting members of both houses to attend parliamentary drop-in sessions. I'll be holding 2 drop-in sessions where I'll answer questions about the review in terms of progress. It will also be an opportunity for members to put on record with me anything that they think that the government should be looking at in terms of this. So this debate has been particularly timely in terms of the issues that you've raised. I'll also be meeting with members of the National Preparedness Commission to gather the views on where our approach to resilience could be bolstered. And finally, I want to ensure the Honourable Member and also members here as well that we will work closely to make sure that consideration is taken particularly from the COVID inquiry Module 1 report and the Grenfell inquiry final report, of which the government will respond to within the deadlines. The Honourable Member has raised today important issues, particularly on the future of the pandemic, food security and hybrid threats. I also wanted to mention that the UK government is aware around the risk around food security. I believe we currently source around 60% of food domestically, so it is important for us to look into this. In terms of the hybrid threats, this is something that we are addressing. And I also want to say the information that you've raised today, particularly about the work your researcher found when going to Finland, found that really insightful and useful to be looking into that. But also, I also want to say that I also share the whole society approach as well. I think that's really important, that in terms of looking at resilience, it's not just done at a government level. We need to get to the point that the whole of society is playing a role in that, and that's why particularly through the work for the Resilience Review, we are looking at how we can work collaboratively across departments, but also with the work that I've been doing, particularly at a grassroots level, making sure that we hear what the concerns are in terms of what we could be doing to strengthen resilience and making sure everyone is part of that conversation. So, I hope the Honourable Member feels reassured that we are taking this seriously, particularly as we are doing a review into the national resilience at the moment. And I look forward to working in partnership with the Honourable Member and other Honourable Members that are here as well throughout the resilience review and making sure that we feed this properly into the delivery of the government so that the wider society benefits from this. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered national resilience and preparedness. As many of that have been, say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Ayes have it. Sitting suspended until 2:30 p.m. Order, order.